In the heart of the vast Pacific Ocean, where waves crash day and night against jagged cliffs, lies a tiny, isolated island, so remote that even on wartime maps, it was barely a faint speck. This is Anatahan. Located about 180 kilometers north of Saipan, Anatahan was part of Japan's Mariana Islands during World War II. Untouched by civilization, covered in dense jungle, and surrounded by deep, unforgiving seas, it was a place no one visited, and few even knew existed. But it was here, on this forgotten island, that one of the most bizarre and chilling tragedies in human history unfolded. A story so strange, it's hard to believe it really happened. One woman, 32 men, 6 years of isolation. No laws, no rescue, no contact with the outside world. And one by one, the men began to die. Under mysterious and often violent circumstances. When help finally arrived, only 19 men were left alive. The one woman, still breathing, still standing, but carrying a story the world could never have imagined. What really happened on Anatahan during those 6 years in hell? Who were the victims? Who was responsible? And when morality vanishes, when there's no law, only power and primal instinct, just how brutal can humans become? This isn't a novel, it's not fiction, it's a true story. And once you start listening, you won't be able to look away. In 1939, amid a wave of government-backed migration aimed at expanding Japan's influence across the Pacific, a 16-year-old girl left her hometown in Okinawa. Her name was Kyoko Higa. With a youthful face and eyes full of dreams, Kyoko carried nothing but the hope of finding a safe place to live alongside her brother during those chaotic times. Her destination was Saipan, then under Japanese occupation, and promoted as a promised land for citizens seeking a new beginning. In Saipan, she found work as a server in a small cafe. Her gentle appearance and kind demeanor quickly caught the attention of many local young men, among them a fellow Okinawan named Shichi Higa. The two began dating, and before long they were married. By the time Kyoko turned 18, it seemed her life was finally heading toward a peaceful path. But in 1944, as the war intensified, Shichi, now working as a labor supervisor, was reassigned to Anatahan, a remote island barely known or mentioned in any official reports. He brought Kyoko with him, determined to continue their life together on this isolated land. Anatahan was harsh and unforgiving, an oval-shaped island roughly 9 kilometers long and less than 4 wide, blanketed in dense jungle and shaped by volcanic terrain. The island's few remaining coconut plantations were in ruins, battered by storms. Only a few dozen people lived there, scattered and self-sufficient. At first, life on the island wasn't too difficult. Shichi oversaw a team of local workers, while Kyoko took care of the household, cooking, cleaning, and tending to their small poultry farm. Despite its remoteness, it seemed Anatahan could be a quiet refuge during the war. But the tides of war shifted quickly. Japan's empire was crumbling across the Pacific. One by one, American forces reclaimed island after island. As panic set in, Shichi grew increasingly worried for his younger sister who lived on a nearby island. One morning, he left Anatahan to find her and bring her to safety. No one knew it at the time, but that would be the last time Kyoko ever saw her husband. He left and never returned. No news, no message, nothing. Kyoko was left alone on the island. From that moment on, she would face the darkest years of her life, on an island cut off from the world where survival would mean confronting fear, loneliness, and something far more terrifying than war. After Suochi disappeared without a trace, Kayoko fell into a void, a vast emptiness surrounded by wild nature and an unrelenting loneliness that stretched on day after day. The only person left by her side was Kiku Ichiro, her husband's superior, a calm and seasoned middle-aged man who had once overseen the island's labor operations. With no one else to rely on, the two began to grow close, not out of romance, but as a matter of survival. The outside world was descending into chaos, and Anatahan was not spared. Not long after Suochi left, American air raids reached the island, reducing the once thriving coconut plantations to ashes, destroying all tools, supplies, and the last remnants of native dwellings. The few scattered locals who remained soon fled during evacuation efforts, leaving only Kayoko and Kiku behind, surrounded by ruins and overgrown jungle paths. They moved deeper into the forest, where the thick canopy offered some protection from the scorching sun and sudden downpours. Their shelter was crude, built from bamboo, palm leaves, thatched straw, and scraps of cloth salvaged after the bombings. Life, at that point, had regressed to something primal. No electricity, no running water, no news, no sound, except for crashing waves, the howling wind, and the occasional cry of a lost bird drifting across the vast ocean. Yet, even in such a bleak existence, a faint spark of life remained. Miraculously, nearly 40 pigs and over 20 chickens that they once raised for food had survived the bombings. The animals had scattered into the forest, but gradually, one by one, they returned. It was as if they recognized their caretakers. These animals would become a vital food source, keeping Kayoko and Kiku alive, one day at a time. Their days fell into a haunting routine. Each morning they checked the pens, foraged for wild fruit, and collected water from rock crevices. At night, the moon was their only light, casting its pale glow over a forest that felt frozen in time. They had no idea what was happening beyond the trees. No radios, no letters, no ships, no planes. Anatahan had become a sealed-off world, a forgotten no-man's land left behind by history itself. And in that terrifying silence, Kayoko had yet to realize the true nightmare was only just beginning. One afternoon in June 1944, the western skies over Anatahan suddenly turned a heavy shade of gray. The air carried a strange, acrid scent, one Kayoko and Kikuichiro recognized all too well from the war. The smell of gunpowder, burning oil, and the ominous warning of destruction. From far across the sea, they heard muffled explosions. Moments later, columns of thick black smoke rose on the horizon. Another air raid, this time closer to shore. No one knew it yet, but that very attack would mark the end of Anatahan's total isolation, at least for a while. One of 4 Japanese fishing vessels operating nearby had been spotted and attacked by American aircraft. 3 of the ships sank immediately. The 4th, heavily damaged, slowly slipped beneath the waves not far from the island. In the chaos, dozens of sailors and soldiers were cast into the sea. Some went down with the wreckage, but 31 survivors, through sheer will, clung to crates, floating planks, even the bodies of the dead, drifting toward Anatahan. By the time they reached shore, they were gaunt, freezing, and mentally shattered. But in their wide, hollow eyes still flickered a fragile hope that this land might offer food, shelter, or simply solid ground. They were 31 young men, 10 Navy personnel, and 21 fishermen and ship workers. The youngest was barely 16, the oldest just over 30. None of them knew the island they had just washed up on was not a haven. It was the gateway to a shadowy labyrinth from which there would be no escape. At first, they scattered across the island, living in small groups, surviving on coconuts, crabs, and wild fruit. They had no idea anyone else was still living there, until one evening, while foraging, a few of them noticed smoke rising from the dense forest. Smoke, a clear sign of life. Following the trail, they stumbled upon a startling sight. Kayoko and Kikuichiro huddled beside a makeshift bamboo hut, cooking over an open flame. The moment the survivors laid eyes on fellow Japanese, after months of drifting, fearing they were the last souls alive, it felt like a miracle. There were tearful smiles, stunned handshakes, disbelief. Against all odds, they had found their own people. Kiku immediately offered food, water, and the last of their antiseptic supplies to tend to the injured. Even Kayoko, though cautious at first, stepped in to help. Initially, the newcomers remained scattered, wary of one another, but survival forced them together. Over time, they gathered near Kayoko and Kiku's shelter, building additional huts, sharing supplies, rebuilding animal pens, and even attempting to re-establish a semblance of order. But no one realized this return to community, seemingly a step toward civilization, was in fact the spark for its undoing. For among the 31 young, isolated, and restless men, there was only one woman. A fragile presence, an innocent anomaly, one that would soon ignite a slow-burning fuse and tear everything apart. Time on Anatahan was no longer measured in days, months, or seasons. It was measured in meals, whether there was one or not, in the rainfall, if any came at all to collect for drinking, and in the number of people who still had the strength to get up in the morning. After settling into their makeshift shelters, the 33 Japanese survivors, including Kayoko and Kikuichiro, began organizing their new reality. With no machines, no tools, no weapons, and no medicine, they were forced back to the most primal form of human existence. They split into groups. Some hunted, others gathered fruit, some cast nets along the beach, others scoured the stream for crabs and shellfish. Everything they did was just to survive another day. Their primary food source was coconuts, the only generous offering from an otherwise barren land. They learned to split them open with sharpened stones, scrape the flesh, drink the water, and even ferment it into a weak form of alcohol, the only escape from homesickness, despair, and the endless sleepless nights. This jungle brew was nothing like the sake of the mainland. It was raw, earthy, and it stirred something deeper, not just a haze, but the awakening of primal emotions. As the weeks turned into months, their clothes disintegrated. Sweat, rain, sea salt, and time ate away at the fabric until it fell apart in strips. Eventually, they fashioned new garments, softened tree bark tied with vines, woven coconut fibers, and dried banana leaves. Anatahan began to resemble a world forgotten by time. A step back 1,000 years. A primitive community lost in the heart of the ocean, where survival meant merging with nature, shedding all modern identity, and relying on instinct alone. And yet, remarkably, they managed to live in peace. No major conflicts, no fights over food, no struggles for power. Maybe hunger wore them down too much to argue. Maybe shared despair made them more empathetic than envious. Or maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous instincts were still lying dormant. For now. From afar, Anatahan looked like a prehistoric micro-society. There were no nations here, no ranks, no last names. Only sunburnt bodies, dirt-streaked faces, and eyes that no longer reflected the future. And at the center of it all, one woman, still among them, still a part of the group, but also the silent fracture line where all order would one day break. Because no one, not even Kyoko, realized yet that what they were living in wasn't peace. It was the calm surface of a bomb waiting to explode.
Life on Anatahan may have appeared outwardly calm, but deep beneath the surface, an imbalance was quietly growing, and it couldn't stay hidden forever. 32 men, most of them in their 20s, full of restless energy, trapped in a jungle, cut off from the world with no hope of return. And among them, only one woman, Kyoko. She was no longer just another member of the group. She had become the center of every glance, every hushed whisper, every long-suppressed desire. At first, the men tried to restrain themselves. They reminded each other, she's the wife of Kikuichiro. But soon, the glances lingered longer. The words came closer, and the space between instinct and reason grew shorter with each passing hour. Some realized that unless something was done, conflict would break out, this time not over food. A proposal was made. Kyoko and Kikuichiro should hold a formal wedding, a symbolic ceremony witnessed by all, to legalize their relationship. The idea was simple. Make it clear to everyone, she's taken, leave her alone. The wedding was humble. No dress, no rings. Just a quiet circle beneath the coconut tree where Kiku held Kyoko's hand and bowed his head in thanks as the other men nodded, tight-lipped. They forced smiles, but behind their eyes, something remained unsettled. After the ceremony, Kyoko and Kiku moved their shelter far from the main camp, trying to avoid the tension quietly brewing. For a moment, it seemed things might return to order. But the true tragedy didn't come from longing gazes. It came from the sky. One day, while foraging deep in the western jungle, a hunting party stumbled upon the wreckage of a downed American bomber, hidden beneath the trees, likely crashed long ago and untouched since. Inside the damaged cargo hold, they found a trove of survival supplies, parachute fabric, dried rations, antibiotics, and most dangerous of all, 4 pistols, broken but repairable, and over 90 live rounds of ammunition. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. 2 men with military experience, Yamamoto and Yamaguchi, were chosen to inspect the weapons. Within days, they had successfully repaired 2 of the guns, turning them into fully functional tools of death. From that moment, the old order collapsed. Guns, an object no one had expected to appear, became the ultimate symbol of power. Whoever held one ruled. No declarations, no discussions. The day those 2 strapped pistols to their waists, every other man's eyes lowered. Their first act was not to protect the group, but to claim Kyoko. Under the pretense of protecting a woman during wartime, they forced Kikuichiro to surrender his wife. Faced with loaded weapons and threatening stares, the man who had once been Kyoko's lawful husband said nothing. He packed up and quietly moved away, fading from her life in silence and shame. Kyoko didn't resist. Or maybe she couldn't. She followed the two men she had not chosen, like a living trophy in a savage game. From that moment on, she was no longer a woman among survivors. She was property, a prize, a spark that would ignite war among men. A few weeks later, the first man died. Officially, he'd fallen from a coconut tree while climbing, but oddly, only Yamamoto and Yamaguchi had witnessed the incident. Whispers began. The dead man had argued with Yamamoto just days earlier. The air on Anatahan had changed. Fishing trips turned into night watches. Eyes no longer averted from Kyoko, they now avoided the men with guns. Fear, which had once bound them together, now tore them apart, silently, fatally. And this was only the beginning of a blood-soaked spiral that no one would be able to stop.
From the moment the guns appeared, Anatahan was no longer a community of survivors. It had become a miniature battlefield where power was measured in bullets, and the island's only woman was no longer referred to by name, but as something to be possessed. After Yamamoto and Yamaguchi took turns controlling Kyoko, the worst fear became reality. The group fractured. When one man ended up with both pistols, their fragile alliance dissolved overnight. No one wanted to share power. No one was willing to watch the other hold everything, especially the woman who had become the silent center of every man's gaze. Conflict was inevitable. The arguments between Yamamoto and Yamaguchi escalated. Words turned to threats. Paranoia turned to violence. And then, after a night of jungle rain, Yamamoto was found dead, his body lying by the stream, blood soaking the moss beneath him. No one knew what happened. No one asked. Yamaguchi had won. Now he held both guns and Kyoko. He was the island's ruler, crowned not by ceremony, but by force. The other men, unarmed and powerless, could only stare with eyes full of rage and helplessness. But Yamaguchi didn't care. He believed two pistols made him untouchable, made him king of this lawless island. But no one holds the throne for long, when law is a luxury and death is a whisper. Less than 3 weeks later, Yamaguchi vanished. Some said he drowned in the ocean, but there was no body, no cries for help, no search party, and no one asked questions. They all knew, without saying it, that he'd received the same fate he had once delivered. The guns changed hands again, this time to Nakawa and Iwai. Quieter men, more discreet. But what they did wasn't any different. They split Kyoko between them, split power, and began watching each other with smiles that masked suspicion. The cycle repeated. Nakawa died first. One morning, he was found slumped at the base of a tree, his head cracked against a rock. No witnesses, no explanations. Iwai didn't deny it. He didn't speak at all. He simply picked up both pistols and walked toward Kyoko's shelter, as if death had become a ritual of succession. But Iwai was different. He was afraid. He'd noticed a pattern. Every man who held Kyoko, every man who held the guns, eventually died, and he didn't want to be next. For nearly 2 years, Iwai lived in constant vigilance. He never drank, never slept deeply, trusted no one. He kept the guns on him at all times, even to bathe, even to relieve himself. He turned his hut
into a fortress. He guarded it not just with weapons, but with fear. And that's why he lasted the longest. But even paranoia can't save you when death is already written. One moonless night, Iwai was assassinated. No one heard a shot. No one saw anyone flee. By morning, he was found lying face down in the dirt, hands still clenched around his pistol, stone cold. From the first loaded round to the moment Iwai fell, 13 men had died. No one called them accidents anymore. No one claimed coincidence. Everyone understood. This wasn't survival. It was a spiral of blood, where desire, power, and fear took turns pushing men toward the grave. And at the center of it all, Kayoko, silently passed from hand to hand, watching one man kill another, watching obsession turn to madness, then to silence. No one asked what she wanted. She was a prize, a curse, a survival debt, defined only by the man holding the gun. After Iwai's death, no one dared touch the guns again. The very weapons that had once driven the island into chaos were now locked away in a wooden chest, two cursed relics no one dared to speak of. But even when the guns fell silent, death didn't stop. In the months that followed, more men died. One fell into a ravine, another disappeared while hunting, one was found hanging from a tree at the forest's edge. No one knew why. No one had answers. Then, a theory began to spread, fast and quietly, like dry grass catching flame. The true source of the island's curse wasn't the guns. It was Kayoko. "She's the root of it all," someone muttered. "Ever since she arrived, everyone's lost their mind." The stares began again, only now they weren't full of desire. They were filled with suspicion, with fear. The woman who had once represented softness, survival, and hope was now seen as a harbinger of madness, as if she carried the curse that was killing them all. A secret meeting was held. No shouting, no arguments. Everyone already knew. As long as Kayoko lived, more would die. And to save themselves, there was only one solution: kill her. The plan was set for early the next morning. Some would guard the jungle. Others would lure her from the shelter. The rest would handle the end. Everything was ready, except for one thing. Among them was a man who had quietly loved Kayoko. He had never spoken to her more than necessary, never crossed any line, but his eyes had followed her every time she passed, a silent guardian in hell. He couldn't let them do it. He couldn't watch them slaughter her like an animal in the wild. That night, he crept to her shelter and whispered, "Tomorrow morning, they're coming to kill you. Run, now." She didn't ask why. She didn't cry. She just nodded, then disappeared into the night, carrying nothing but the will to survive. Kayoko's solitary fight for life had begun. For 33 days, she hid in the jungle. She crawled through razor-sharp ravines, slept in freezing caves, drank dew from leaves, and ate roots and insects. Her body bled, blistered, and burned with fever. She nearly died, but she lived because turning back
meant certain death. On the 33rd day, barely clinging to consciousness, Kayoko crawled to the shoreline searching for water. And then she saw it. A U.S. warship, anchored in the distance. She couldn't believe it, but the sound of engines, the glint of metal, and the fluttering American flag in the wind were real. In one final act of desperation, she climbed a tree and ripped a piece of her tattered clothing, tied it into a white flag, and waved it wildly above her head, screaming until her voice broke. "I'm here! Help me!" On board, a U.S. sailor spotted something strange. A figure, movement in the trees. Binoculars were raised. The blurry signal from a half-naked figure clinging to a branch in the deep forest was confirmed. A rescue boat was launched. Just hours later, Kayoko was pulled from the hell of Anatahan, the only woman to survive nearly 6 years of terror. Sitting in the medevac bay, her eyes were blank. She no longer believed she was truly alive. But her nightmare wasn't over, because ahead of her lay a different kind of jungle, a society that could be just as cruel as the wilderness she had left behind.
Though Kayoko had been rescued, the men still left on Anatahan remained trapped, not just on the island, but in their own fear and denial. Despite multiple efforts by the U.S. military, letters dropped by plane, loudspeaker messages, repeated announcements that the war was over and they could return home safely, none of it was believed. "It's a trap," one of them said. "The Americans want to lure us out and kill us all." And so they stayed. No weapons, no steady food supply, no future, but also no trust in anything but themselves. Everything changed when one man received a letter, a special one. He studied the handwriting, the punctuation, the way her words flowed, and suddenly he knew. It was her, his wife. Not forged, not a lie. The very woman he once loved, once shared a life with before the war, had written it. Inside were simple words. "My love, the war is over. Come home. Our son has grown so much." He wept. For the first time in 6 years. That man was the one who finally convinced the rest. This wasn't a trick. Peace was real, and the only thing they had left to hold on to was life. On June 26, 1951, the last remaining men on Anatahan surrendered and were rescued. They were transported to a U.S. base in Guam for recovery, then returned to Japan. But what awaited them wasn't open arms. It was a new reality they no longer belonged to. Many had already been declared dead. Funerals had been held. Families had moved on. Some wives had remarried. Some homes no longer existed. They returned as ghosts, strangers from another time, unsure of where or even if they fit in the modern world. And Kayoko, she became the center of a media storm. Japanese newspapers, reporters, and audiences swarmed her, treating her not as a survivor, but as the lead actress in a twisted drama of sex, power, and death. They called her the Queen of Anatahan, the woman with 32 faces, the siren who made men kill. Their eyes weren't filled with sympathy, only judgment. Yes, some defended her. They said she had been abused, exploited, imprisoned. But for most of society, Kayoko became a symbol of moral collapse, of chaos, of shame. She had survived, and that somehow was her crime. In 1952, Kayoko agreed to star in a stage play titled Anatahan, a reenactment of her real-life tragedy. She didn't play a fictional character, she played herself. A year later, a film adaptation was released. She was again cast in the lead role. Audiences saw a woman who was silent, somber, and distant, as if her soul had never left that jungle. But the spotlight was never a home. A few years later, she disappeared from public life, settling in Tokyo, working as a nightclub dancer to survive. Later, she opened a small shop with her second husband, hoping to find some fragment of peace. But happiness drifted from her like sea wind over a deserted island. Her husband died young, and Kyoko was left alone. Again. In 1974, she passed away from a brain tumor at the age of 50. Her life closed like the final page of a book written in pain, silence, and truths that were never spoken aloud. The Anatahan incident wasn't just a series of deaths on a remote island. It was a mirror, reflecting what humans can become when stripped of law, morality, and hope. When that happens, power needs no reason, death needs no justice, and man can become beast in the blink of an eye. One question still lingers. When law disappears and primal instinct rises, what is left to keep a human human? We may never have the answer, but we do have a name. Kyoko Higa, the woman the world condemned simply because she survived.